The appraisal process, MBV2 600. Welcome everyone to the appraisal process. Let's take a look at the 8 modules for this course. Module 1 will be a discussion about valuation versus an appraisal. Module 2 will talk about the review on the valuation engagement. And Module 3 will also be continuation of that. Module 4 will talk about the different definitions of the word value. I mean, value has so many meanings to so many different people, but what do we mean by values and how we define them? Module 5 talks about valuation methods for very small businesses, and you see in quote, because they use a little different methodologies. And then we're going to show you how the ISBA goes ahead and does the basics of valuation methodology training. Because again, we want to stop bringing ISBA more into the picture, because at the end of this particular term, and then you have completed semester 1, you'll be receiving the BCA. So I want to bring in the ISBA a little bit more into this term. The ISBA's valuation process, part 1, and modulators, part 2. So let's take a look at this concept of valuation versus appraisal. And you're going to say, well, aren't they the same? And I will tell you honestly, the answer is yes and no. They're very, very similar. But in everyday language, there tends to be a certain kind of nomenclature which we use. Valuation is really reserved to businesses and assets and so forth, tangible assets, I should say, versus an appraisal, which really is meant for real estate. And we'll show you, I have a great chart that really starts describing it. And you may ask, why do we care? Well, in every country, there seems to be different rules regarding what is required for licensing to do real estate. In the United States, for instance, you need to take licensing exams for real estate appraisals. Well, you don't have to do that for a business valuation. Business valuation, we have our own credentials through membership organizations. But for real estate, it seems to be more governed by the states in the United States. And I can tell you in foreign countries, it's also, especially in England, they have to be licensed to do real estate valuations. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. So according to USPAP, the definition of an appraisal is the act or process of determining the value of a business ownership interest, security, or an intangible asset. Well, that takes care of almost everything. So according to USPAP, the definition of an appraisal is the act of determining value for almost everything. All right? So that sets the broad definition. But in practice, as we always know, things are a little bit different. And this is where I really want to focus on it. And you could say, well, why are we spending so much time on this? Because it is really important. If you are a business valuator and you're doing a valuation of a company that most of its value is in real estate, and you're not licensed to do a real estate valuation, lawsuits galore, and you'll be in violation of the law. That is why. And we really need to make this distinction between a valuation of businesses versus a valuation of real estate. It's very important. So let's take a look at this. Is an appraisal the same process as a valuation? And the answer is yes. And as such, I tend to use these terms interchangeably. Appraisal, I'm doing a business appraisal, I'm doing a business valuation, or you got an appraiser, you got a valuator. We use it in everyday language interchangeably. However, in practice though, there's differences. We got to be careful when we're dealing with professionals. If I'm saying an appraiser, it's mostly that is understood to mean real estate. If I'm saying I'm a valuator, it's understood to mean that I do business valuations. Yes, we're really cutting it thin here. But the point is there is a difference. And while I'm talking from the perspective of the United States and England, it applies to almost every place in the world. There's really not that much different here. So like I said here in this particular slide. However, in practice, there is a tendency to distinguish appraising, which usually applies to real estate, from business valuation of other items and entities. So when one says one is an appraiser, you're dealing with you're dealing with real estate, and a business valuation is everything other than that. And that's one of the easy rules to bifurcate. However, when you're doing a valuation of a company, more than likely they have real estate. So what does that mean? Do you have to hire an appraiser as well in that valuation? Again, it's going to get into a lot of ethical issues and a lot of competency issues. I mean, in my opinion, if real estate has some significant value to the value of the company, then I probably would hire someone with an appraisal background. However, you might just be valuing their assets and not their real estate, so therefore one might not need to go through and getting an appraiser. But like I said, it's an issue where a lot of common sense, and you need to be able to work with professionals and make a good decision. Work with attorneys or barristers to make that decision. While appraisals and valuations are by definition very similar, federal rules, now we're talking about the United States, and there is this law out here called FIRREA, F-I-R-R-E-A, requires every state, remember the United States has 50 states, to establish a real estate appraiser license to perform real estate appraisals with federally related transactions. In other words, if your transaction has federal implications or you have real estate in more than one state, you need to be licensed by the states to do this. In other words, I could be credentialed from business valuation, but that's not the same thing as being licensed by licensed by the state to do real estate appraising. Yes, I know it's really cutting it thin, but there is a difference. There is a major difference here. So you don't want to get yourself stuck in this issue. So the concern is whether business valuations are doing valuations that have substantial real estate. Are these business valuations doing valuations with substantial real estate? If so, at what point does the valuator hire a real estate appraiser? That's what I was talking about earlier. At what point do you believe you should hire a real estate appraiser? To me, if you're dealing with a large organization and they want us to value a real estate, I wouldn't even think twice about getting an appraiser into the picture. It makes sense. Why wouldn't you? It makes perfect sense to do that. Why take a chance? And secondly, that real estate appraiser might be more competent than you in that area. I mean, business valuation is enough. It's complex enough without having to worry about all the intricacies in real estate valuation. That's a whole different area altogether. So what we have here, which is very, very good, is PPC's Guide to Valuation in Exhibit 1-2, which I uploaded here, has provided a checklist to determine whether a business appraiser or real estate appraiser should be hired for the engagement. And now if you could take a look at this, it gives you a nice little idea as to when you should hire what. Now take a look at the boxes. You need to say, hey, you check the box. And if you think there's a lot more boxes being checked on the right side, which is a real property appraisal, then I think the answer is pretty obvious. But again, let's take a look at some of these items so we can get a better feel for it. So let's take a look at a business appraisal on the left. Now the question they're asking is the entity to be appraised a commercial, industrial, service organization pursuing an economic activity other than the sole operation of real estate? If the answer is yes, then it's a business appraisal. I mean, if they're like a law firm, and the operations are everything and maybe real estate's a little bit, but if the only thing they do is real estate, that's another question. Is it an equity interest? Is it a fractional minority interest of the entity? Those are really business appraisal type questions and issues. But now let's take a look at the real estate appraisal. A residential commercial property, is it a residential commercial property, such as is it an interest in real estate as opposed to an equity interest? Is it a whole or partial interest in real estate? Owners have a direct claim in a real estate. So if this is really what the assignment is, then obviously you need to get a real estate appraiser, as opposed to this side where you might not. So again, are you valuing an equity interest or are you valuing a real estate interest? So these are the kind of things you need to check off the box to feel comfortable what you're doing. So let's go on and take a look at the next one. Does the entity to be appraised derive its revenue from providing goods, or is it from leasing or using real estate? Well, that's a pretty clear cut. If it's from providing sales or goods, then it's a business valuation. If it's from the sale or use of land, then it's real estate. Primarily use assets such as machines, employee skills, and talent, or is it using real estate as its primary asset? Conduct an activity which is more important than the location of the real estate, or conduct an activity wherein the location of the real estate is a primary valuation factor. You see, this is key in deciding. This is important. I like this one. Is the activity, conduct an activity wherein the location of the real estate is a primary valuation factor. Is it that it's in a location where everyone goes to, for this particular real estate issue? I mean, those are the important. Has it have a value that fluctuates primarily with the real estate market, or does it have a value that fluctuates with conditions in this industry? These are the things you need to go through. You need to go through with your staff, and again. But I'm super conservative, so my belief was simply state that, hey, if I have even a slight inkling that it's one of these, I'm getting a real estate appraiser. And the last kind of group of questions that you can ask is, does the entity have intangible assets, that's patent, trademark, copyright, blah, 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 or the assets that are primarily tangible real estate? So if my main assets are real estate, then it's pretty obvious. Can these assets be moved? Or the real estate cannot be moved? Well, obviously, that's pretty obvious. You got a variety of tangible and intangible assets which interact to produce economic activity, or is it primarily tangible real estate assets that produce economic activity in the form of lease revenues? Is the significant operating expenses such as management, labor, marketing, advertising, or is the operating expenses limited to real estate? These are pertinent questions one must go through to make a decision whether or not to hire a real estate property appraiser. If in doubt, hire. That's my best advice to you. If in doubt, hire. This concludes Module 1.